Please welcome President and CEO of the Aspen Institute, Dan Porterfield.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for gathering here for this inspiring program. I'd like to bring greetings from our board chair, Margot Pritzker, who is a huge supporter of the McNulty Program and Prize. We have many trustees here. We have our leadership council members here. We have supporters, fellows, leaders of the Aspen Institute, spouses of all the ones I just said, and we have some remarkable laureates of the McNulty Program. So this will be a really great discussion, and so important that in times, as we say here, of a world that can be in conflict, that we think about how do we brave the divides. And one way is by thinking to ourselves also that it's a world in opportunity, that it's a world in communion, that it's a world in change, that it's a world in friendship, it's a world in hope. And all of our laureates reflect all those ideas, that we can energize and motivate and move ourselves and our communities for change, and we can do it in a spirit that brings people together, promotes unity, learning, understanding, and builds the muscle for ongoing civic renewal. So important in our country and all around the world. And we can learn a lot from young people, and we have three that will be with us tonight that reflect so many different talents and qualities worthy of both our learning and of imitation in the world. If we can just bottle this and show it to the rest of the world with the help of the McNulty Foundation, that does some pretty amazing work to promote the values of the fellows and the work of the fellows, a lot more good things will happen. Things we won't even know we helped to create by supporting people like our laureates. So a big thanks to Anne, who's a trustee of the Aspen Institute, and to the McNulty Foundation, the whole staff of the foundation, the family of the McNultys. Pretty incredible McNulty community, and the Aspen-McNulty marriage is like what Shakespeare called a marriage of true minds. And so thank you so much to all of you. So there's been about 2 decades of McNulty Prize winners, and the program has evolved in dialogue with the winners and with the Institute and with the board of the McNulty Foundation. We've really got it working really beautifully. It's always been great. Each time we iterate, you iterate, Anne, it takes it to another level of meaning and of significance and impact. Just watching that video, the video doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the brilliance of the McNulty team that helps the laureates tell their stories and helps develop materials that can help them spread the message. So important for change makers. Not just that we do the work, but that we find a way to amplify the work through the stories that we tell. And this foundation does that at the highest level. So for me, it's been a lot of fun to also get to know some of the fellows. And in this group, Mohamed and Krithi and Layla are really phenomenal people. And we're lucky because they'll be interviewed tonight by Zinhle Essamuah. And so it's great to have Zinhle back in the house, this renowned NBC journalist. It's going to be a great night. So thank you for being here. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Anne McNulty to the front.
Thank you, Dan. It is a real pleasure to be here tonight in New York, especially in this very low-key little setting at the Plaza in this particularly gorgeous room. I always feel so lucky to be part of this community, which is really committed to lifting up leaders who are not only showing up when they're needed, but showing all of us the way forward. So 20 years ago this month, in fact, my husband John passed away. And it was sudden and very painful. And after that, my children and I, Johnny, Bryn, and Kevin, decided to create this prize in John's name to honor him, and in particular, his belief in supporting leaders from all different kind of backgrounds and helping them to succeed. So this prize in many ways is a recognition of that legacy. And I'm happy to have Johnny and Kevin here tonight. And I would say Bryn in spirit, although that sounds like She's also not with us. She's very much with us, but in Miami. And so this, as Dan alluded, this has been an incredible partnership between the McNulty Foundation and the Aspen Institute. You know, because Aspen elevates leaders who are really seeking to make contributions in their communities. And what we recognize is those who have really done an amazing job of creativity and innovation in answering challenges in their communities. And so we recognize them for their courage and their creativity and their impact. So since creating the prize, we have recognized 60 incredible leaders over this period of time. From around the world, across Aspen Institute programs, you know, AGLN, we have the economic innovators, we have global innovators, we have a lot of great programs now at Aspen, all of which, you know, we interact with and look for the best people to be with our McNulty Prize. And I'm happy to say there are 6 of our winners here tonight. In fact, one of the very first, Jordan Castello, is here. And Delio Leggetti is also here somewhere. We have several of our winners that I'm really thrilled to say with us tonight. And we're very proud of them. We think of ourselves as a family, so we get the reflected glory from the amazing things that they do. So there you also this time will get to meet our winners, our 3 winners from this year, as Dan alluded to, really extraordinary. And also I'd like to recognize our small but powerful McNulty team that's here tonight. April Lage, and along with Johnny and Kevin, Nina Sawney, where's Nina, and Esther Clark. And the films, as you alluded to, have been not only very powerful, but very recently we were recognized for an award for the quality of our films. So we're very excited about that. So we are especially thrilled to have Zinhle as our moderator tonight. She is, as you alluded to, a very well-known NBC newscaster every day, the Daily News, which appears to 1.2 million viewers every day. And she has also addressed a lot of really tough issues. I always have trouble with this phrase, maternal mortality in Texas, and juvenile justice, and water issues in Jackson, Mississippi. And each of these, she's been very successful in raising the profile and getting people to actually take action on these issues. So she is extraordinary, and then she will be joined on stage, of course, by this year's 3 winners, Layla and Mohamed and Krithi. So let me welcome them and Zinhle to the stage. Voila.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. I'm so looking forward.
Hi, everybody. How are we doing?
This is so great. I'm so excited.
I think we're at the Plaza. I think we can do a little better.
Thank you.
How are we doing this evening? Well, it is such an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this conversation tonight. As was mentioned, my name is Zinhle Essamuah, and I'm joined by 3 really incredible leaders tonight. I could go through your bios, but I think it's best we hear from you directly. But before we talk, I want to sort of set the scene, right? Because the topic tonight is braving the divide in a world of conflict. And I don't know about you, but there is a bit of conflict going on, right? Not just in our country, where lines are quite literally being redrawn, but all around the world. And it's work that the 3 of you are doing. And I was encouraged, because so often panels, well, they can be boring, right? Let's be real. But not this one, not this one, not this one. But also, I think they can leave people feeling discouraged. But in prepping for this and talking with Aspen and McNulty, what was said was this is going to be a deeply optimistic event. And so I want us to all tune in with those ears. Our resident optimists tonight are Layla Zaidane, who is the president and CEO of Future Caucus, Mohamed Ali Diini, founder and director of the Iftin Global, and Dr. Krithi Karanth, CEO and chief conservation scientist at the Center for Wildlife Studies. Thank you all for being here and coming from so many different regions. So to start, not just as leaders, but as people, so much of our strength comes from who we are, our own stories. So I'd love to just hear from each of you directly your story, as the youth would say, your villain origin story. Though I think the work you're doing is probably the opposite of villainry, it's your heroes. So the origins of your work, but also the why. Why do you do what you do? Layla, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I just have to say it is so, so nice to be here with everyone. As some of you know, in July, when the McNulty Awards were made public and I found out I won, I had just gone to the hospital 30 minutes prior to give birth to my first child. And so I am one of, I hope, a very small group of people who has posted a LinkedIn post while in labor. I was very proud to share the news. And so it feels really good to be here in person with everybody. So as Zinhle mentioned, I'm Layla Zaidane. I'm the CEO of Future Caucus, which is the country's largest cross-partisan network of Gen Z and millennial elected officials. And we work with them to help them build relationships, work on policy solutions together across the aisle so that political polarization is not what's stopping us from getting things done. And I think this work, my origin story, it has been in my bones forever. My family is from Morocco. I'm a first-generation American, and I grew up 20 miles down the road here in New York, and I was in 8th grade when 9/11 happened. And I had been a proud American. I loved being the American cousin back home in Morocco and being the Moroccan student here. I loved both of those things, but in that moment, I was told I had to choose between those two identities, and that felt wrong. It felt impossible. How could I choose one of those? I'm both. And fast forward 15 years later, I'm in DC, sort of looking at and observing our US political system, and I'm faced with sort of that same nonsensical choice, binary choice of to solve problems, to exist in this country, to participate in our democracy, you have to choose one thing or another. And I thought that didn't make sense. There's not Democrat problems or Republican problems, there's problems and there's solutions. And I thought, well, what if we could bring some of that humanity, that complexity that I have within myself, and I'm not unique in this, we're all many things, we all contain multitudes. What if I could bring that humanity into our politics? And so that's what Future Caucus does. We work to introduce people as people. This might shock you, but politicians are people. It's crazy. They're real, live people, and once they get to know each other, oftentimes when a crisis emerges, they now see each other as collaborators, not as adversaries. And we believe that by working with the youngest generations, we can scale a culture of governing that takes into account the humanity of all of us and breathes new life into our democracy in a way that meets the moment, in this fractured moment, in this complex moment that requires leaders who are leading with empathy and with pragmatism and with solutions. And for me, it feels like it's scratching an itch that I have had ever since I was told as a little girl, you can't be two things at once. And I think the answer is we're all lots of things at once, and our politics should reflect that.
Powerful. We all contain multitudes. And to that end, Mohamed, I want to go to you. Your story is a powerful one. I understand you came to the United States at 9 years old from Somalia, fleeing civil war. Walk us through what you've been doing since then and what your work ultimately aims to do.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you, Dan, for calling me young. And so I appreciate that.
Well, to be clear, he called 3 of 4 of us young.
Yes.
So we can figure out.
So yes, my origin story began in Somalia. So I was born in Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. And when I was 9 years old, my mother and father sat us down and told us, the city's a bit unstable. We're going to, my father said, we're going to send you to abroad, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you'll be gone, and once things settle down, you'll eventually come back. And then we went to Canada first, and I remember just watching the news and watching our country pretty much burn down. And it was at that moment that we realized we weren't going back. And so I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, went to high school there. And just growing up in a Somali American community, my family would always tell me about what Somalia was like before the Civil War. So just having dual identities, just growing up in the US, I still felt this pull towards Somalia and to my country of birth. And 12 years ago, I had the chance to go back, and it was a 2-week trip that was really transformational for me. I remember landing at the airport, and just to give you background, Somalia at that point was kind of 20 years of civil conflict, and there was a terrorist group that was controlling most of the country. The government fell apart when it was 1991, and when I arrived, there was a new government, but it controlled maybe 30% of the country. So I remember just coming to Mogadishu that was very different from the Mogadishu of my childhood. And I remember standing before my childhood home and looking at the bullet-ridden wall and thinking, this could have been me. We were on one of the last commercial flights out of the city, and if we had not gone on that flight, this would be the life that I was living. And so that was the impetus for me to start Iftin Global. Iftin means light in Somali. And I went back to Columbus, Ohio, and I started this as a side project. And the idea was to create economic opportunities for young people. And that side project slowly took over my life. And then 11 years ago, I decided to move back to Somalia full time. And over the last 10 years, we've built one of the largest economic development and workforce development programs in Somalia. But probably one of the biggest barriers that we've hit was that we found that a lot of young people that we were working with were suffering from trauma. A lot of them saw violence on a daily basis, conflict on a daily basis. We did a study and found out like a quarter of them were suffering from PTSD. And so a few years ago, we started building the entire mental health workforce in Somalia and integrated mental health and job creation programs. And so that's kind of my origin story.
Thank you so much. Seeing the whole parts of people is an important part of making progress. And Dr. Krithi, I want to go to you. You grew up in India surrounded by wildlife. Talk to us about how that has informed what you now do.
So I normally don't like hanging out with people. I'm just conditioning this.
Can we get that on a t-shirt? I feel that.
My preferred company is tigers, elephants, leopards, sloth bears, what have you, right? And my origin story starts with tiger poop, sloth bear pee, elephant tusks, and this is because my dad started taking me to the jungle when I was a year old. I spent the first 17 years, because both my mom and dad had PhDs, busy professionals. Every time she had to travel, she left me with him, which was in the jungle, right? And so I just spent the first 17 years of my childhood just watching nature, watching animals in absolute stillness, and I think that's kind of given me a lot of calm and resilience today. And it's a gift that I would give everybody in the room today. I think all of us are born with an inherent connection to nature, and sometime in our teenage years we lose it, and then as adults we kind of come back to it. And I think COVID brought a lot of people back to nature in some ways, and I hope more people find that grounding. So I didn't want to be a wildlife scientist growing up. I ended up coming to the US as an 18-year-old, studying at 4 amazing universities. And ironically, every time I had to design, I figured out I wanted to be a scientist. I just didn't know what kind of scientist, right? And eventually, yes, not very original, ended up being a wildlife scientist. So in my family, that's not original. So every time I had to do work, I found myself going back home to India. And I did this for 13 years. I lived here. I sort of consider myself a third American, 2/3 Indian, and that's the mix I'm happy with. And just like Mohamed, 15 years ago, I made the call that I wanted to go home. And why does this matter? If you look at the world today, you may think you are so far from tigers and elephants. You're not, right? You have bears in this country, you have lynxes, you have cougars. We have lost 60% of the world's mammals in the last 50 years. And this is North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. This is what binds us together. what are we as humans doing to non-humans on the planet? And so my work has heavily focused on human-wildlife conflict, and this includes people losing crops to elephants, being killed by bears or injured by tigers, losing livestock. So there's a variety of losses. We urban Americans and urban Indians don't face these losses. The losses are felt by people living in remote places right next to wildlife areas. So today, the Center for Wildlife Studies, I didn't found the organization, I refounded it 7 years ago.
What do you mean by that?
So my father had started it. When he stepped away, I decided that I didn't want this org with a 35-year-old legacy disappearing. And so I stepped up and said, I'm going to rebuild this, and literally had to rebuild it from scratch for a lot of reasons. And I'm very proud to see where we've come in the last 7 years. We work in 100 of India's 700 protected areas. We probably reach 5 to 10 million people directly through our work, and probably 100 million people if we get really successful at solving this issue of human-wildlife conflict. And it matters today. There's just 4,000 wild tigers left. There's just 30,000 wild Asian elephants left, and these numbers can go on every continent, right? And I don't want to just see animals in zoos and in ranches in Texas. We need animals to survive in the wild. And so that is the mission, to save, protect wildlife and wild places amidst solving human problems.
Yeah. And Doctor, you're really hitting on the fact that your issue, all of your issues are so urgent and timely. Clearly you're all leaders, but I think what really makes a leader is also how you show up in conflict. So I'd love to talk about conflict with each of you. Layla, we'll start with you since, and I should have mentioned, the last time this event was hosted, I was told, as a little fun fact, was the day after the 2024 presidential election. How fitting is it that we're back here the day after another major election, particularly for the city of New York? And so, Layla, when I think of conflict, I don't think of politics. I'm joking, right? We're currently in the longest government shutdown in US history, right? Young people in particular have said, I don't trust institutions like I used to, and I certainly don't feel like I can talk across the aisle. And yet your organization, Future Caucus, seems to take a really optimistic view that we can, in fact, have conversations across the aisle. I guess my question here is, what are we collectively, because there's so many leaders in this room, perhaps getting wrong about how to talk to each other and how to collaborate, conspire together?
Yeah. You know, I think perception, unfortunately, is reality, and I'm optimistic because I am up close to the reality that we are seeing more and more young people run for office and win. We saw a 76% increase of people who are maybe looking at institutions and saying, this is broken, and then raising their hand and jumping into the fire, not running away from it. In the last legislative session, we saw that while young people were about 25% of state lawmakers, they wrote 40% of bipartisan legislation enacted into law. And so what I get to see—
Can you say that again? Because I feel like people miss that. That's big.
In the last legislative session, so the 2023-24, young people were 25% of state lawmakers, and they wrote 40% of the bipartisan laws that got signed into law. So they're punching above their weight. They're driving the bipartisanship that we see happening, certainly at the state level. And we don't see that. None of you see that. You see a government shutdown. You see conflict. And I think that then creates a permission structure, perhaps, for all of us to act the way we think everyone else is acting. But the reality is, there's common ground being found all across the country, all of the time. And I'll tell just one quick story. And as a New Yorker, obviously the example I'm going to pick is from Arkansas. The two people that I'm thinking of were on opposite sides of the abortion issue. And they decided to co-chair a Future Caucus chapter in the Arkansas State Legislature. Rep. Aaron Pilkington, Rep. Ashley Hudson, Democrat and Republican, kept talking, kept getting together, came to an event that we hosted and co-led a discussion about prenatal to 3 issues. And they went back home to Arkansas and got coffee, and they kept talking, and even though one of them was pro-life, one of them was pro-choice, they sort of worked through that to see, well, we care about maternal health. And through that aha moment, through that persistence, they were able to work together to pass a landmark bill that was signed into law earlier this year by the millennial governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, called Healthy Moms, Healthy Babies, which was a $45 million bill that expanded access to prenatal care, covered new things with Medicaid, doula, community birth centers. And I think what I love about that story is that it is an example of people who do disagree. There's a very real, deep disagreement. And yet, they were able to find common ground on something that matters today to thousands, to tens of thousands of people in the state of Arkansas who are immediately going to have better maternal health outcomes because of this work. And there's not time to get into it in this answer, but that was through a program called the Innovation Lab that Future Caucus organizes on specific policy issues that lawmakers, bipartisan lawmakers across the country can come to us, learn, cross-pollinate good ideas across state lines. And it's a program that the Aspen Global Leadership Network, through my participation, actually gave me the space to design and help me find seed funding for. And so I just say all of that to say common ground and bridge building is happening inside of our state houses. That's one of 400 bipartisan bills that Future Caucus members passed last year.
Wow.
And so I guess to people who are cynical and say that we're too divided, I say, no, you're wrong. It's happening, and just come to us and I will show you 20 examples of something that happened last week.
So powerful. And if we go across the sea to Somalia, Mohamed, I want to go to you because I understand when you created Iftin Global, you say a terror attack changed your approach to your work. Can you speak to that? And also the fact that, yes, you're seeking to create job opportunities in a space that has experienced so much conflict and famine. And I was struck, I believe 70% of people in Somalia are considered young people, 2/3 unemployed. Is that right?
Exactly, yes.
So clearly the conflict is palpable. How has that informed how you're doing this work?
I think when we first started this program, I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was thinking that young people were living in a vacuum, that I could give young people a job and they would raise themselves out of poverty and that's all they needed. And I didn't really take into account initially that they live in a really in an environment that's embedded with conflict and trauma. And I remember there was one young man in one of our vocational training classes that he was about to be dropped out of the class. And I sat down with him and he told me his story. He said that a year before his uncle had been killed in a terrorist attack, and his family was living in an IDP camp outside of the city, and every day to get into one of our classes, he would have to get on a bus, drive 2 hours, and go through checkpoints that reminded him of his uncle's death. And it was at that point that I realized, like, how can I ask him to focus on financial forecasting when he's trying to process such a deep-seated trauma? And as I said earlier, like 1/4 of the young people in our classes were suffering from PTSD. Over 70% had severe to moderate to severe anxiety disorders. And so I mean, my training is as a lawyer, and my focus was on creating jobs, and I had absolutely no experience with mental health. And we tried to find a mental health expert. We found one psychiatrist in Mogadishu for a population of like 2.5 million. Wow. And he was completely overwhelmed and didn't really have time to support us. And so we reached out via LinkedIn to a Somali American mental health expert and just said, we really need your help. And over the last 10 years, we've actually built Somalia's first national mental health workforce. We've trained over 100 mental health counselors working across the country who are now serving 300,000 community members. And our communication and education programs around mental health have reached over 1 million people. Just to give you context, Somalia has a population of 12 million, so that's 1/12 of the country. And so, yeah, we started off as a economic development organization, but found ourselves by necessity working around mental health. And then we ran into another barrier. we created this network of mental health counselors, but we found that a lot of young people weren't taking advantage of that. We would refer them
What did that look like?
So we trained all of our teachers on mental health and trauma-informed workplace. And so if they saw a case of someone suffering from anxiety, they would say, well, would refer you to a counselor. And maybe 10% would take advantage of that referral, which is, I think, the case in a lot of contexts, even here in the US. And so we made a decision and said, okay, we're going to embed mental health and trauma healing into every one of our workforce development programs. So now if someone wants to become a mechanic or get a loan from us, they're required to take a 12-week group counseling course. We don't call it mental health, we call it life skills and job readiness. And over the 12 weeks, they learn about emotional self-regulation, anxiety management, anger management, how to recognize negative coping mechanisms, kind of like the things that you need to navigate a workplace. And really what has been amazing for us have been the economic results. So before we integrated trauma healing, we saw a 40% drop in our classrooms before the class is finished. Now 90% of young people are staying in the classroom. We did a study kind of comparing employment rates for those who received trauma healing and those who didn't. So before trauma healing, 60% of young people were employed 1 year after the program ended. With trauma healing, 98% were employed. And so for me, the conclusion is that trauma healing and mental health cannot be separated from economic opportunity. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but so a few years ago, I was visiting a colleague of mine in a town called Kismayo in southern Somalia. He was also Somali American. He grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and actually started an organization that helped with children's nutrition. And I was on my way to see him for coffee at his hotel when a terrorist organization attacked the hotel, and about him and 26 others were killed in the terrorist attack. And then the next day, I was attending the mass burial. There's hundreds of people attending, and it was that moment that I realized, like, trauma is in the atmosphere. It's endemic. It is collective. It's communal. It passes from one individual to another. I remember standing in the crowd and someone was describing in very normal terms, jumping over the wall, escaping the terrorist attack as if they missed like a car accident. And so over the last 10 years, we've started working with teachers, training them on trauma-informed education. We've started working with governments on trauma-informed leadership, and really started working with women's groups and elders on mental health and trauma healing as well.
No, thank you so much for sharing, and so much of what you're saying highlights that it's not either or, right? It's not trauma-informed care or job opportunities. You need both and. And doctor, that leads me in some ways to you, because actually in that film we saw earlier, the question was posed perhaps by you, do we prioritize humans or wildlife? And in essence, you say yes, right? Both and. Can you talk about how you've managed to stay steadfast in your values and your morals on that issue specifically, and also how you've brought people along or are trying to adopt the same beliefs? Because so many people aren't prioritizing wildlife in the way that you are.
So I think it's hard for people who live with animals to actually prioritize wildlife, right? And for me, kind of building on what Mohamed was saying, is the conflict has two sides to it. There is human-wildlife conflict and there's human-human conflict, right? And this puts people in really hard times where a herd of elephants comes through, wipes your crops out, you don't feed your family for 6 months. A leopard comes and kills your livestock, you're not able to, that is your bank, and you've just lost 20% of what's in your bank, right? Just to put it in, I guess, urban parlance, right? And as we started to solve for these issues, what we realized was you've got to make human lives better first before you go out and ask them to care for wildlife, right? It doesn't matter that they live next to the world's best population of tigers. To them, I'm not able to feed my family, my kids are not able to go to school because they're terrified of walking in the forest because something will come and get them, right? And so this is how we started to design the programs at CWS. The first was very much an emergency response, call a toll-free number. We have 4 of these today that serve 4,000 villages. We help, call, to explain the problem to us. We help file a claim with the government, and you get money back for whatever losses you suffered. That's just the beginning of solving the conflict piece. You show up there when they're in deep, dire need, and you keep showing up, whether they call you 100 times in 10 years, we've shown up, right, for certain farmers. Then you realize there's so much trauma in the community because the government is blamed for what the animals are doing, and then you've got to kind of bolster up frontline health workers, forest staff, saying, these are the ways you manage conflict when an animal shows up, and these are the things you do to keep people safe, right? And then that goes out to all of these kids growing up around these parks, and they don't have the excitement of seeing these animals. They live in trauma, they live in fear of these animals coming and doing something harmful to them, right? So we built this out over the last 10 years. We have 6 of these programs that kind of look at different actors in a community. One, how do you deal with immediate loss? How do you prevent long-term loss? How do you inspire the next generation of environmental stewards? And these numbers are, 60,000 children today who we've worked with, 50,000 frontline health forest staff, 30,000 families directly helped with conflict, right? And that starts to move the conversation from, okay, there are these animals, we are here, we need to share space. And how do we do that in meaningful ways that are not retaliatory, not driven by anger? And I think people know how to live with animals. We've done this for millennia. It's not something new. Change the narrative from using words like conflict, raid, trample, to the animals here. They've moved through these landscapes forever. They've used the same resources that we have. And this is the story on all continents. I just feel like the urgency is higher in India because you have 1.4 billion people living next to some of the most iconic wildlife. And I was joking with these guys earlier today that if you solve for 1,000 people in India, people laugh at you, right? If you solve for 1 million people, then you've got an innovative solution at scale, and that's what drives the work we do. Can we get to millions of people and say we've at least tried to solve the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we've talked about who you all are. We've talked about the conflicts that you're working through. I'd love to talk future for a moment. And maybe, Doctor, I'll start with you to the point of scale, right? I love that, what you just said. If you solve for 1,000 people where you are, it's nothing, right? You need bigger numbers, and you've accomplished those numbers. What are the learnings? What can we learn from you in terms of how to scale up for a future that's sustainable for wildlife and for humans?
So I think we have a planet that can hold today 8 billion people, maybe 10 billion people. There are ways to solve the human side of it so you can sustain wildlife. I think the hard question you want to ask is, do you want these animals around, right? We are so self-centered as a species. Do we really care if some rare dancing frog disappears or if some reptile in South America blinks out, right? And we're seeing accelerated extinction of species. So for me, there is a higher question of, as a superior brained species, how do we kind of act as stewards of life, all life on the planet, right? And for me, I think that is the big question, and we have the economic resources to do it. Do we have the social and political will to do it? I think there are brilliant examples of countries like Costa Rica and Bhutan. Actually, I think Tanzania, some of these countries are going to get it right. The US, it's a mixed bag. I think there are parts of the US where the wilderness is protected beautifully, and there are other parts which are in deep trouble, right? China has decided they're going from 15% of China being wild to 25%, and the Chinese will get what they want done very quickly when they decide to do it, right? So you need the political, the social, the economic to really drive this at scale, and for enough people to want it. Right?
I appreciate that you're saying it's both collective will, but also a bit of a moral imperative. Do we want the animals?
Call us the god species because we actually determine the fate of so many other species, right?
And to that end, we also need to look inward. And so, Mohamed, I want to go to you, to the point of the future, navigating a future that's sustainable for all. So much of what you've done, even in seeking job opportunities for so many in Somalia, is caring and tending to the inner parts of people. Can you speak to that as we're looking toward a better future? How do we also make sure that we're caring for ourselves and the people that we're trying to serve?
I think one of the biggest challenges I faced over the years in working around mental health and economic development is that people don't see mental health directly. They don't see the results when it comes to healing. It's an invisible wound that people don't see, and when it heals, it takes a long time to do so. So often I tell people it takes really patient capital when it comes to supporting mental health and mental health programs globally. And just to mention what Krithi said about scale, I think it's important to understand, I've been talking about Somalia, but we're really living in a time of unprecedented conflict that hasn't been seen since 1946. There are 2 billion people that live in communities impacted by fragility and conflict, and a quarter of them are suffering from trauma. We've been doing research, secondary research, both in Somalia and globally, and it takes one traumatized worker loses 43 days a year due to trauma symptoms. So either they don't show up to work, or when they do show up to work, they can't really function. And when you scale that up throughout the continent in Africa, that's about 5 billion workdays lost every year, which is equivalent to the entire workforce of Spain just disappearing every year out of the economy. So oftentimes I talk about mental health in economic terms because we've been talking about mental health for the past 100 years, but we haven't really moved the needle when it comes to investment in mental health. Look at Africa, maybe 1% of ministries of health budget is focused on mental health. So for me, healing is not just about the individual, but it's also about the society and collective healing. And what I've been trying to prove is that healing and economic opportunity really can't be separated. And also, I think for me, I had a conversation with one of our clinicians a few years ago. We did a study looking at how many young people had retained jobs from our first cohort, and we found that about 30% had illegally migrated, so they got a job, but they saved that money. And she told me, it's a lack of imagination. She said that trauma actually damages the part of our brain that allows us to imagine. It actually shrinks it. And if you think about that for a moment, we use our imagination to plan for the future, to envision different scenarios. And if we can't imagine a better future, we give up. So for a lot of young people, they're unable to imagine a better future, so they join a terrorist group because they can't imagine another alternative. They decide to go on a rickety boat across the Mediterranean Ocean because they can't imagine a different future. So I think for me, it's been about repairing the ability of these young people to imagine. And I often say I'm no longer in the business of economic development or mental health. I'm in the business of imagination and repairing the ability of these young people to imagine better futures for themselves.
I love that so much. And I feel like we need to collectively inhale what you just said, right? Because, I'm a journalist, so much of what we report on is the grief and the suffering people feel. But if people don't feel safe, right? If they don't feel like they're gonna be able to pay that year's rent, they can't imagine a world with wildlife. They can't imagine a world with work opportunity. Layla, I want to bring you back in, especially here in the United States, when people see the constant rat race and politicians calling each other names that we never expected to hear, on TV, let alone even in person. What's your framework for not just staying optimistic, but give us some tools for navigating the future as the lead of the Future Caucus?
Yeah, I love what you just said about the capacity to imagine. And I want everyone to close your eyes and think back to when you were in your 20s and the possibilities you imagined ahead of you. And now imagine that with all of the doors open to you, you choose to be a public servant, to be in public life at a time where political violence is threatening your colleagues, and it's not lucrative to serve, and certainly at the state level. And now imagine you decide to do it anyway. And I think our job is not to create new motivation for young people who are stepping into office right now with ambition and enthusiasm and ideas and an entrepreneurial spirit to break out of the gridlock and polarization that has made their predecessors unsuccessful. Our job is to keep that flame alive. And I think the most important thing that we can do is to tell any one of those leaders, you are not alone. You are not alone in the legislature. Here are 20 people who, just like you, are trying to find a way forward. You are not alone. Civil society has a role to play, and we are here to support you with the networks that you need, the policy ideas that you need, the space to just take your cape off for a moment and be human that you need. And I think that persistence, it's not perfection, there's no end point to it. It is the continual work of showing up and then going home and coming back the next day and showing up over and over again, knowing that you have, I think, people around you gives our leaders what they need to inspire the rest of us of what is possible. And as I look at our democracy, that's the field that I work in, I genuinely feel optimistic about the future because we've had 1,900 young elected lawmakers join Future Caucus. We're in 36 states. We are growing. And as people look and see, man, these leaders ain't it. When they are stepping in to serve, when I see a 76% increase in young people choosing to do something to recognize a sense of agency, to me that says that we're on track for more participation, more engagement, and it's going to take all of us. Our job is to be the cheerleaders to say, we've got your back, let's go forward together.
I love that. Well, I want to end where we started, which is braving the divide, leadership in a world in conflict. So just a quick speed round. I'd love a phrase. Let me even take my glasses off for this. This is serious. Okay, you guys still with us? You all still with us? Okay, a quick speed round. Braving the divide. What's keeping you all brave? For those of us who maybe are like, they can do it, but I don't know about me. A phrase or a word. Mohamed, I'll make you go first.
I'm going to have to go back to imagination, because I think even in the hardest times, I think looking forward, just imagining a better future, and I'm constantly inspired. I know it's more than one word, but I'm constantly inspired by kind of the young people that I work with, even if I'm about to give up and I'm about to say this isn't working for me. I mean, one of the young people that we did trauma healing for, he started a brick-making factory, a small one in southern Somalia, and over the course of a year helped 60 others defect from the terrorist organization. And so he used his imagination, and he kind of inspired others to imagine a better future. So I just go back to the ability to imagine. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Trust. I think that to be brave doesn't mean that you have certainty or you have the answers or you're not afraid. It means that you are willing to summon the courage to keep showing up and to trust that putting one foot in front of the other and trying your hardest and trying your best and trusting the people around you to be in that work with you can lead to something better, to something bigger, to something better than we ever could have imagined. I think that is what bravery is. It's leaning into the uncertainty and keep going anyway.
Dr. Krithi?
For me, it's, I think, resilience, grit, and patience. We live in a very impatient world, and a lot of the work all of us do today, you're not going to see outcomes tomorrow, day after, maybe 10, 20 years down the line. So you have to have a long vision on this, and the ability to pick yourself back up over and over and over and over again. And this is what worries me about young kids, is that the first time something fails, my life is over. Your life is not over, it's just getting started, right? Pick yourself up and keep going.
Good things take time. Well, thank you three for making the time. Well, can we all give them a round of applause? Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you, Aspen, Dan, McNulty, Anne, for gathering us all here. And thank you all for the work you continue to do in your communities. The fun doesn't stop here, folks. There's a reception, okay? So make sure you make your way there, maybe make a new friend, and keep being brave. Thank you all so much for being a part of tonight.